Since 1980, a gulf has been widening between both ends of the income spectrum in the United States. In particular, people without college degrees are finding it more difficult to secure a middle-class lifestyle, and the effects of this phenomenon haven't been distributed equally across the country. This map shows the change in the employment rate of the adult population between 1990 and 2019. The blue areas represent regions that have seen the population share of this group decline. That's because the economies of these areas have been dramatically reshaped by several macroeconomic trends, including increased competition from China, the decline of coal power, and advances in automation. With fewer job opportunities available, workers with college degrees have migrated from these regions and concentrated in major cities, and those left behind without a college education are competing over fewer opportunities. How did we get here, and how do we fix it? Those are two questions that Gordon Hanson, a professor at Harvard Kennedy School, has spent his career trying to answer. He says the prevailing thinking among economists and policymakers about these issues in the 1980s and 1990s warrants re-examination.
There was a lot of optimism about what market-oriented economies would achieve. Higher rates of economic growth, more income equality, addressing issues of environmental sustainability, promoting global peace. Turns out we were way too optimistic. We thought that just unleashing market reform would solve the problems that we viewed as being largely the result of excess government intervention in the past.
Professor Hanson's research focuses on how global economic forces impact local economies. He has co-authored several studies that have examined how increased import competition from China, also called the China shock, has led to declines in manufacturing employment in regions that were once manufacturing powerhouses. Ideally, displaced workers would be able to receive government support to keep them afloat until they can find new jobs.
In practice, those benefits, they're helpful, but they tend to be pretty small, and they also tend not to be tuned to local labor market conditions. What I mean by that is, if you're in a place where you lose your job, but everybody else in the community is gainfully employed, your likelihood of being able to find a new line of work is probably pretty decent. But if you're in a place where, say, all the furniture factories have shut down, your ability to find new work could be challenged. What we want out of unemployment insurance is it to address local economic needs, and so to be more generous when we see these concentrated instances of workers being pushed out of work.
It can take decades for a region to rebuild its economy around new industries. But unemployment benefits in most states are capped at 26 weeks, and federal welfare benefits have a lifetime limit of 5 years. Social Security is only available to retirees and disabled individuals. That means policymakers must come up with new ways to help these communities absorb and recover from major economic disruptions, like the China shock. Professor Hanson breaks down the policy response into 3 broad approaches. The first is to let market forces work. In theory, supply and demand would naturally spur regions to adjust to new economic realities and workers to retrain without government intervention.
We're pretty sanguine about the idea that, well, if jobs are lost in manufacturing or jobs are lost in particular in something like furniture production, those furniture workers who might be in towns in North Carolina and Virginia aren't going to have a hard time finding jobs in new sectors and perhaps in other regions. What we've discovered is that workers do have a hard time making those sorts of adjustments. It's costly to move between occupations, and it's really costly for them to move between different places to live.
Another approach is to incentivize workers to move to new regions with better job markets. For example, cities with more vibrant job markets could make it easier for new workers to find housing. But increasing the housing supply is a thorny political issue in many cities, and moving to a new region is expensive, making it infeasible for many, especially those without a college education. A third approach involves place-based regional interventions. Rather than moving people to jobs, we move jobs to people. Regional interventions come in many forms with varying degrees of efficacy and outcomes. One of the most famous regional interventions was the creation of the Tennessee Valley Authority in 1933 as part of Franklin Roosevelt's response to the Great Depression. The mandate of the authority was to modernize the infrastructure of the Appalachian region through the building of power plants, roads, and other public goods. According to research at UC Berkeley, the authority led to major increases in agricultural and manufacturing employment.
Another promising approach are public-private partnerships in which businesses get together with community organizations and say, what do we need to grow and prosper and not get stuck in these moments and periods of stagnation that often comes when your industry falls on hard times for one reason or another. The Right Place in Grand Rapids, Michigan is a really good example of how business came together first with community leaders to establish one of these public-private partnerships, and they have figured out how to keep the furniture industry in Grand Rapids vibrant over a couple of decades in an intensely competitive global environment.
But many place-based policies haven't worked. One infamous example is the Kansas City border war of the 2010s, when Kansas and Missouri used tax incentives to lure Kansas City businesses back and forth across the border. The Hall Family Foundation estimates that the border war cost taxpayers over $335 million, but produced few net jobs. So how do we figure out which regional interventions work and which ones to avoid? That's one of the goals of a new project called Reimagining the Economy Professor Hanson has co-founded with fellow Harvard Kennedy School professor Danny Roderick. The mission of the project is to produce multidisciplinary scholarship that reshapes narratives about how society achieves inclusive prosperity. In other words, how do we reap the rewards of economic growth in a way that benefits everyone and not just those at the top?
Reimagining the economy is about thinking through ways in which we can take new approaches to generating good jobs for workers, in particular without a college education, for how we bring wage and job growth back to places in which jobs have disappeared over the last couple of decades. And this is going to mean moving out of our comfort zone. Thinking about policy interventions that a couple decades ago, we would have thought, well, no, that's a bridge too far. That's too much intrusion into the economy. We've come to appreciate the fact that we've got to embrace some new forms of experimentation, and we've got to be humble about the ways in which we've been wrong in the past.
This video is based on a lecture Professor Hanson gave to Harvard Kennedy School Executive Education. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons below to get notifications about future videos from Harvard Kennedy School.